In the archives of the Galactic Concord, there exists a record so frequently accessed that the data crystal containing it has been reinforced with additional quantum stabilizers to prevent degradation. It is known throughout civilized space as the Great Walkout, and it marks the moment when the balance of power in our galaxy fundamentally changed. I am chronicler Vex Talon, and it is my duty to preserve this account for future generations of all species. What follows is the true story of how humanity, that curious species from the isolated blue world, transformed from a footnote in galactic politics to a cornerstone of the modern Concord. It began, as many legendary tales do, with a meeting. The Grand Concilium of the Galactic Concord convened on Harmonia Station, that architectural marvel suspended in the perfect gravitational balance between three stars. The station's central chamber, a vast dome of transparent ultraglass revealing the cosmic ballet outside, had hosted thousands of negotiations over centuries, but none would prove as consequential as the Resource Allocation Summit of Galactic Year 7326. Ambassador Eliana Voss adjusted her collar as she studied the approaching station through the viewport of the diplomatic shuttle. Unlike most human representatives before her, who approached such meetings with barely concealed desperation, Voss displayed only a serene confidence that puzzled her alien counterparts. At 53 standard years, she wore her silver-streaked black hair pulled back severely, her brown skin bearing the subtle marks of someone who had spent considerable time on low-gravity worlds. "Final approach to Harmonia Docking Bay 7, announced the pilot. "Ambassador, the Thalosian delegation has already filed a procedural objection to our late arrival." Voss smiled thinly. "Of course they have. How late are we?" 3 minutes, Ambassador." "Perfect. Just enough to irritate but not enough to justify sanctions." She turned to her team. "Remember your briefing. Today, everything changes. Keep your reactions measured, no matter what they say." Commander Adrian Holden, a compact man whose military bearing remained evident despite his civilian attire, raised an eyebrow. "Even when the Vrexians start their usual humans are barely evolved primates routine?" "Especially then," Voss replied. "They're expecting emotional outbursts. It's what they've come to expect from us and what they use to dismiss our legitimate concerns." Her dark eyes hardened. "Let them underestimate us one last time." The shuttle docked with a gentle shudder, and the Earth delegation made their way through the elaborately designed corridors of Harmonia. The station was a testament to the Concord's supposed commitment to cooperation. Every architectural element incorporated designs from all 27 major member species. Yet humans, despite being members for 73 years, were represented only by a small mosaic near a tertiary waste reclamation port. As they approached the concilium chamber, Dr. Lakshmi Mehta, the delegation's xenopsychologist, moved closer to Voss. "The Vrexian ambassador is positioned by the entrance, likely attempting to establish dominance through territorial positioning." "Classic Drak Thul," Voss murmured. "Let's not disappoint him." Ambassador Drak Thul of the Vrexian Empire stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scaled crimson skin stretched over a muscular frame evolved from apex predators. The elaborate bone crests protruding from his shoulders indicated his high military rank before his diplomatic appointment, a common career path in Vrexian culture where ambassadorships were often rewards for successful conquest. "The Earth delegation honors us with their presence," Drak Thul announced, his translator failing to fully mask the sarcastic inflection. "I trust your primitive FTL drives didn't tax your capabilities too severely?" Voss smiled warmly, as though greeting an old friend. "Ambassador Drak Thul, always a pleasure. I see you've chosen to stand exactly where the station's ventilation system will carry your species' threat pheromones most effectively throughout the chamber. Very traditional of you." The slight widening of Drak Thul's secondary eye membranes, a sign of surprise not usually detected by humans, didn't escape Drak Thul's notice. The Vrexian recovered quickly. "Your knowledge of biochemical diplomacy is unexpected, Ambassador Voss." "Oh, we humans are full of surprises," Voss replied pleasantly. "Shall we proceed? I believe we've kept the Thalosians waiting for nearly 7 minutes now, and you know how they feel about their schedules." The concilium chamber hummed with the low-level conversations of a dozen species as the human delegation took their assigned seats, notably smaller and lower than those provided to other delegations and positioned in the sector that experienced occasional gravity fluctuations due to power routing inefficiencies. Speaker Oridex of the Thalosian Communion rose from his hovering platform. The gelatinous being's translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that accompanied his speech, a secondary communication channel that human translators still struggled to fully interpret. "This concilium is now in session," Oridex intoned, his 9 eye stalks swiveling to survey the chamber. "We convene to address the ongoing matter of Sol System resource allocation quota adjustments, as petitioned by the Earth delegation for the 17th time in 5 standard years." The Caprith representative Nix Varthex chittered softly from his nutrient bath. The insectoid merchant's antennae twitched with what those familiar with Caprith body language recognized as amusement. Perhaps if the humans learned to manage their consumption more efficiently, these tedious meetings would be unnecessary. Commander Holden's jaw tightened, but he maintained the neutral expression Voss had insisted upon. The familiar pattern was beginning again. Thalosian procedural obstacles, Vrexian intimidation, and Caprith economic condescension. The same tactics that had kept humanity resource-starved since they joined the Concord with such optimism 7 decades earlier. "The Concilium acknowledges Earth's petition," Speaker Oridex continued, "and has prepared a compromise solution that addresses the concerns of all parties." Zuri Okoro, the delegation's AI specialist and newest member, leaned toward Voss. "That was fast. They usually drag the procedural review out for hours." "They're eager today," Voss whispered back. "Watch what happens next." The compromise appeared as a holographic projection in the center of the chamber, a revised resource quota that actually reduced Earth's mining rights in their own asteroid belt by 17%, while increasing their mandatory resource contributions to Concord development projects. Dr. Meta's eyes widened slightly as she reviewed the figures on her datapad. She passed it discreetly to Voss, who merely nodded, as though the proposal was entirely expected. "The Vrexian Empire believes this compromise is most generous," Drakthul announced, "particularly given humanity's recent difficulties with meeting their existing obligations." "Difficulties," Commander Holden muttered, "caused by your military exercises, disrupting our shipping lanes." Voss held up a hand subtly, and Holden fell silent. The chamber waited for the predictable human protest, the emotional appeal that would be met with bureaucratic stonewalling. Instead, Ambassador Voss simply made a note on her data. "The Earth delegation requests a 1-hour recess to review these terms," she said calmly. The request was so standard, so procedurally correct, that Speaker Oridex granted it automatically, his bioluminescence flickering with patterns that suggested mild confusion at the lack of immediate human outrage. In their private chamber, undoubtedly monitored despite assurances of diplomatic privacy, the human delegation finally expressed their true reactions. "They're not even pretending anymore," Holden fumed, pacing the small room. "This isn't negotiation, it's systematic resource strangulation." Dr. Meta nodded, reviewing data on her secure tablet. "At these reduced quotas, Earth's strategic reserves will be depleted within 3 months. They know exactly what they're doing." Zuri Okoro, her fingers dancing through holographic data projections only she could see thanks to her neural implants, looked up grimly. "The Vrexians have increased military patrols near our Kuiper Belt outposts by 70% in the last month. Intelligence suggests they're preparing to discover violations that would justify seizure." Ambassador Voss listened calmly, seated at the center of the storm. "And the Caprith markets?" "As predicted," Okoro replied. "They've been quietly acquiring controlling interests in the processing facilities that handle 90% of Earth's external resource shipments. They're positioning to apply a pricing squeeze the moment the new quotas take effect." Voss nodded, as though hearing exactly what she expected. "Then we proceed as planned. Operation Walkaway is authorized." The room fell silent. Dr. Mehta was the first to speak. Ambassador, with respect, that contingency was developed as a last resort. Once implemented, there's no going back. Look at these figures again, Lakshmi, Voss said quietly. We've reached last resort territory. They're not negotiating, they're managing our extinction. The Vrexians want our territory, the Kiprith want our markets without our competition, and the Thalosians are happy to provide the bureaucratic framework to make it all look legitimate. Commander Holden straightened, military bearing returning fully. The sole defense fleet is positioned according to the operation parameters. Admiral Zoe awaits your confirmation. Voss took a deep breath, the weight of 7 billion human lives momentarily visible in her expression before her diplomatic mask returned. Send the authorization. Authentication Voss Omega 73232 and alert our friend in the Kiprith delegation that his timing needs to be perfect. When the Earth delegation returned to the concilium chamber, a subtle shift in their demeanor caught the attention of the more perceptive representatives. The humans moved with a unified purpose that had been absent in previous sessions. Speaker Oridex's bioluminescence pulsed impatiently. Has the Earth delegation reviewed the generous compromise proposal? Ambassador Voss stepped forward, taking the central position typically reserved for senior Concord members, a minor but deliberate protocol violation that caused a ripple of murmurs. We have reviewed your proposal, she stated, her voice carrying clearly without technological amplification. Before responding, we wish to address certain relevant developments that impact these negotiations. Drakthul's secondary eye membranes narrowed. The parameters of discussion were established at the outset. Procedural regulations do not permit the introduction of new agenda items without prior filing and approval. Not introducing new agenda items, Ambassador, Voss replied coolly. I'm addressing factors directly relevant to the proposal before us. Specifically, the Vrexian military strikes against 3 human mining outposts in the past 14 days. The chamber erupted in hisses, clicks, and translated exclamations. Speaker Oridex's gelatinous form pulsed rapidly with patterns indicating distress or possibly feigned surprise. These are serious allegations, the speaker intoned. Do you have evidence to present through proper channels? Evidence like this? Voss asked, nodding to Okoro, who activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. The footage was damning. Vrexian military vessels, clearly identifiable despite their deactivated transponders, methodically destroying automated human mining facilities in the Kuiper Belt. The timestamp indicated the attacks had occurred while preliminary negotiations were already underway. Drakthul rose to his full, imposing height. These are clearly falsified recordings. The Vrexian Empire does not engage in unprovoked hostilities. Interesting choice of words, Ambassador, Voss replied. I said nothing about the attacks being unprovoked. Your assumption is revealing. Before Drakthul could respond, Nix Varthex of the Kiprith Consortium chittered loudly, his translator converting the sound to a slightly too amplified interruption. The Consortium finds this concerning. If verified, such actions would constitute a violation of Trade Neutrality Statute 7.3, which the Kiprith were instrumental in establishing. The apparent break in the usual unified front against humanity caused visible confusion among the Thalosian and Vrexian delegations. Speaker Oridex's bioluminescence flickered in patterns that suggested rapid private communication with other Thalosian representatives. The Thalosian Communion proposes a procedural review committee to evaluate these claims over the next standard quarter cycle, Oridex finally stated, eye stalks waving in complex patterns. In the meantime, we should proceed with the resource allocation adjustments as proposed. Ambassador Voss smiled, a sharp expression that contained no warmth. That won't be necessary, Speaker Oridex. The Earth delegation does not require a committee review. She paused, looking around the chamber. Nor do we accept the proposed resource allocation adjustments. You have no standing to reject a concilium compromise, Drakthul growled, mandibles flaring. Your species' position in the Concord is probationary at best, maintained through our collective generosity. Is that what you call it? Voss asked, her voice suddenly hard as hull metal. Generosity? You've systematically restricted our access to resources in our own system. You've manipulated trade regulations to devalue human goods. You've conducted military operations against our facilities while sitting at this very negotiating table. She looked around the chamber slowly. We've been patient. We've followed your procedures. We've filed your forms. We've respected your customs. And in return, you've conspired to reduce humanity to a client species, dependent on your generosity to survive. The chamber had fallen completely silent, an unprecedented occurrence in concilium sessions, which typically hummed with the background noises of 24 species biological processes and translation devices. Today, that ends, Voss continued into the silence. Effective immediately, the Earth delegation is withdrawing from these negotiations. Speaker Oridex's translator seemed to struggle with the concept. Clarification required. You wish to reschedule? No, Speaker. We are leaving the negotiating table entirely. Earth is withdrawing from resource allocation treaty discussions, pending a fundamental re-evaluation of our relationship with the Concord. Drakthul laughed, the sound grating through his translator. You cannot withdraw from mandatory Concord procedures. Your species has obligations that have been systematically manipulated to our disadvantage for 73 years, Voss interrupted. We are exercising Article 17.5 of the Concord Charter, the right of any sovereign member to call for relationship reassessment under conditions of substantial iniquity. The legal citation caused visible consternation among the Thalosian representatives, whose gelatinous forms pulsed with rapid patterns of communication. Article 17.5 was an obscure provision, rarely invoked, and never by a junior member species. The human memory is impressive, but selective, Speaker Oridex finally responded. Article 17.5 requires a qualification review by the Founding Species Council before it can be invoked. Without prior approval, We're not asking permission, Speaker, Voss interrupted again, signaling to her team, who began gathering their materials. We're notifying you of our decision. Earth is suspending participation in all resource treaties for 30 standard days, during which time the Concord may reconsider its position. The chamber erupted into chaos as translation devices struggled to keep pace with the multiple species vocalizing simultaneously. Commander Holden moved protectively closer to Ambassador Voss, as Drakthul's security detail adopted more aggressive postures. This is unprecedented, Speaker Oridex's translator struggled to be heard above the din. The consequences for Earth will be severe if you proceed with this tantrum. Ambassador Voss paused at the chamber exit, her team assembled behind her. You've mistaken patience for weakness, Speaker. You have 30 days to reconsider. I suggest you use them wisely. With that, the Earth delegation did what no species had dared in the 3,000-year history of the Galactic Concord. They simply walked out of negotiations. As they strode through the corridors of Harmonia Station, stunned aliens of various species pressed themselves against walls, their translators chattering with confusion and disbelief. A junior Thalosian diplomat floated directly into their path, eye stalks quivering with agitation. Ambassadors do not simply leave, the gelatinous being pulsed, bioluminescence flickering with distress patterns. There are procedures for session conclusion, formal recognition of... Consider this an innovation in diplomatic protocol, Voss replied without slowing. I'm sure there will be extensive committee reviews. Commander Holden suppressed a smile as they continued past the flustered diplomat. In the 73 years humanity had participated in the Concord, they'd been forced to follow countless arbitrary procedures designed to reinforce the hierarchy. The simple act of walking away had never occurred to any of the stagnant bureaucratic species. At the docking bay, they found a Vrexian security detachment blocking their shuttle access. The lead officer, scales flushed with aggressive crimson, stepped forward. By authority of the Concord Security Directive, this delegation is required to return to the concilium chamber to address procedural violations, he growled, one clawed hand resting meaningfully on his ceremonial but still lethal side weapon. Voss regarded him calmly. Officer, I recommend you check Concord Charter Section 12, Paragraph 7. No diplomatic representative shall be detained or impeded when operating under sovereign diplomatic authority. We are leaving now." The security officer's secondary eyelids flickered with uncertainty. Clearly he had expected immediate compliance, not a citation of legal code. In 3 millennia of Concord history, no one had ever needed to invoke these protections, because no one had ever defied the system. Zuri Okoro stepped forward, the neural implants beneath her close-cropped hair glimmering subtly. "I've taken the liberty of transmitting our diplomatic credentials and travel clearances to Harmonia Control. They've already granted departure clearance. Interesting that someone ordered a security detachment without proper authorization." The tension was broken by the arrival of an agitated Thalosian administrator, pulsing wildly with distress patterns. After a hurried consultation with the Vrexian officer, the security detachment reluctantly stepped aside. "This incident will be noted in formal censure proceedings," the Vrexian officer snarled as they passed. "Looking forward to ignoring them," Commander Holden replied cheerfully. As the delegation's shuttle detached from Harmonia Station, Dr. Mehta finally asked a question they'd all been considering. "Do you think they'll take the 30 days seriously?" Voss gazed out at the stars. "They'll spend the first 10 days assuming we'll come crawling back, the next 10 in confusion, the final 10 in panic. Set a course for Earth, we have preparations to complete." True to Voss's prediction, the Concord's response followed precisely that pattern. For the first 10 days after what galactic news networks were calling the human tantrum, official channels broadcast increasingly stern warnings about sanctions and repercussions. Earth received formal censures from 17 member species, most of whom had previously shown little interest in human affairs. Then, silence fell as humans systematically withdrew from Concord space. Merchant vessels returned to Seoul, scientific missions ended abruptly, even tourists departed, leaving prepaid accommodations empty. The Concord, which had always viewed humanity as a minor player in galactic affairs, suddenly found itself without access to human markets, human innovation, or human data networks. By day 20, the first truly worrying reports began to circulate among Concord leadership. Thalosian intelligence assets reported unusual activities at previously abandoned human mining outposts. Vrexian military scouts near Earth's territorial boundaries went silent. Caprith traders found themselves locked out of financial systems they had previously manipulated with ease. On day 29, an emergency session of the Concilium convened as disturbing information flooded in from multiple sources. The Vrexian fleet had detected massive energy signatures from the direction of Sol System, signatures that suggested technological capabilities far beyond what humanity had ever demonstrated publicly. Caprith data analysts reported that human encryption systems they had previously penetrated with ease had suddenly become impervious to their most advanced algorithms. Most disturbing of all, Thalosian long-range sensors detected human vessels appearing simultaneously in multiple Concord systems, without any trace of conventional FTL transit signatures. Somehow humans were moving through space without using the established hyperlane network that the Concord monitored and controlled. As the Concilium struggled to make sense of these developments, a single human communication arrived. A formal notification that Ambassador Eliana Voss would return to Harmonia Station the following day to present Earth's terms for renewed engagement. On the 30th day, the human diplomatic shuttle approached Harmonia Station, but it did not come alone. Behind it, emerging from what appeared to be a localized distortion in spacetime itself, came a vessel that caused the station's sensors to issue multiple contradictory readings. The ship, if it could be called that, seemed to exist partially out of phase with normal space, its boundaries shifting and uncertain, its size impossible to measure precisely. Only its name was clearly visible, emblazoned in simple Earth standard: Consequence. The Concilium chamber was filled beyond normal capacity as representatives from all 27 member species crowded in to witness the humans' return. The atmosphere was tense, with none of the usual factional socializing that preceded formal sessions. When Ambassador Voss entered, the difference in her demeanor was immediately apparent. Gone was the careful deference, the diplomatic humility that humans had displayed for decades. She walked directly to the central speaking position, her team arrayed behind her with the quiet confidence of people who held a winning hand. "Greetings, representatives of the Galactic Concord," Voss began without preamble. 30 days ago, I informed you that humanity was reassessing our relationship with this body. Today, I return to share the conclusions of that assessment and to offer a path forward. Speaker Oridex's bioluminescence patterns had lost their usual rhythmic confidence. The Concilium acknowledges Ambassador Voss and expresses concern regarding the unauthorized vessel currently positioned in restricted space near this station. The consequence is precisely where it should be, Speaker, Voss replied calmly, as are the 17 other human vessels currently positioned throughout Concord space, though your sensors may have difficulty locating them due to their phased state. The chamber erupted into alarmed vocalizations as the implications sank in. Human ships had penetrated the heart of Concord territory without detection. For 73 years, Voss continued when the noise subsided, humanity has participated in good faith, while the Concord systematically exploited our resources, restricted our growth, and treated us as a primitive species to be managed, rather than a partner to be respected. She activated a holographic display showing resource flow diagrams. During that time, we appeared to comply with increasingly restrictive quotas while quietly developing alternatives. While you were focused on controlling conventional resources, we perfected phase mining technology that allows us to extract resources from dimensions adjacent to normal space. Resources your sensors cannot detect and your ships cannot reach. Images appeared showing human facilities operating in a strange, shimmering state of semi-transparency. These facilities have been operating at full capacity for over 15 years, invisible to your monitoring systems. Drakthul rose, his posture aggressive despite the presence of his diplomatic staff. If the humans have been deceiving the Concord and violating resource treaties, "We have violated nothing," Voss interrupted sharply. "Every treaty specifically regulates resources in normal space. Phase mining operates outside those parameters. A technical distinction I believe the Thalosians and Caprith will appreciate given how frequently they've exploited similar loopholes to humanity's disadvantage." The Thalosian representatives pulsed with rapid, agitated patterns that their translators did not convert to speech. "Our terms are simple," Voss continued. "Humanity will rejoin resource allocation discussions under the following conditions. First, immediate recognition of Earth's sovereign rights to all resources within the Sol system, including those in adjacent phase space. Second, renegotiation of all trade agreements on terms of genuine equity. Third, full investigation of Vrexian military actions against human outposts with appropriate sanctions." She paused, looking directly at Drakthul. "And finally, humanity will take its rightful place on the Concord Security Council, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails." "Impossible," Drakthul snarled. "No species can demand council membership. It must be earned through centuries of contribution and—" "And what?" Voss asked quietly. "Military power, economic influence, technological advancement? By any objective measure, humanity now qualifies." She gestured to the image of the consequence hovering outside. "That vessel represents a fraction of what we've developed while you thought us struggling to meet basic needs. We can offer the Concord phase transportation technology that would revolutionize galactic commerce, or we can keep it to ourselves and watch as human merchants outcompete everyone else in the galaxy." For the first time in recorded history, the Concilium chamber remained silent for a full minute as the implications sank in. It was Nix Varthex of the Caprith who broke the silence, mandibles clicking rapidly before his translator activated. "The Caprith Consortium recognizes the wisdom of reassessing our relationship with Earth. We would be interested in discussing technology exchange agreements at mutually beneficial terms." The dam broke as other delegations hurried to express similar sentiments, the previous unity against humanity fracturing, as each species scrambled to secure favorable positions in the new reality. Speaker Oridex's bioluminescence stabilized into patterns indicating formal recognition. The Concilium will convene a special session to consider Earth's proposals. Ambassador Voss, the Thalosian Communion acknowledges your species' unexpected contributions to galactic development. Thank you, Speaker, Voss replied with perfect diplomatic composure. Earth looks forward to a more equitable partnership moving forward. As the formal session concluded and representatives broke into smaller discussion groups, with many clustering around the human delegation, Commander Holden moved close to Voss. 73 years of being underestimated, and it all changes in 30 days, he murmured. Was it worth the wait? Ambassador Voss watched as Drakthul was notably isolated, other species suddenly reluctant to be seen in close association with the Vrexians. Strategic patience usually is, Commander. Sometimes the most powerful move in any negotiation is simply walking away from the table. As recorded in the archives of the Galactic Concord, the Great Walkout fundamentally altered the balance of power in our civilized galaxy. Within 5 standard years, humanity had transformed from an exploited minor member to a cornerstone of Concord policy and commerce. The phase technologies they introduced revolutionized everything from resource extraction to transportation, while their insistence on more equitable diplomatic frameworks benefited countless other emerging species. What many historical accounts fail to mention is the personal aftermath for the key players. Ambassador Voss, having accomplished her mission, declined the prestigious position on the newly formed Interspecies Technological Exchange Council that was offered as a diplomatic olive branch. Instead, she chose to establish the Voss Protocol, a diplomatic training program for representatives of emerging species that taught them not just how to navigate Concord bureaucracy, but how to identify and counter the subtle mechanisms of economic subjugation. Drakthul of the Vrexian Empire was recalled in disgrace, his bone crests ceremonially reduced in a public shaming ritual. However, the pragmatic Vrexians eventually adapted to the new reality, redirecting their expansionist tendencies towards scientific exploration rather than military conquest. A transformation few would have predicted. Perhaps most surprising was the fate of Nix Varthex, revealed years later to have been a long-term human intelligence asset. The Caprith merchant had recognized early that humanity's innovative capacity represented a more profitable future than the stagnant exploitation model favored by the consortium. His calculated betrayal during the walkout earned him exile from Caprith space, but secured him a comfortable position as trade advisor to Earth's diplomatic corps. Speaker Oridex, adaptable as most Thaldosians, survived the political fallout by positioning himself as the champion of the reformed Concord, conveniently forgetting his role in the previous regime. His bioluminescent patterns, however, reportedly still fluctuate erratically whenever human delegates cite Article 17.5 in negotiations. But perhaps most telling was the linguistic shift that occurred in diplomatic circles, where once human had been whispered as shorthand for primitive or emotional, it came to signify something else entirely. Be careful in these negotiations. If you push too hard, they might go human on us. A warning that continues to echo in the Concilium chamber to this day, and one that has changed the fate of countless emerging species who might otherwise have suffered humanity's earlier fate. The diplomats of old failed to understand a fundamental truth about humans. Their greatest strength was never their technology, but their willingness to walk away from a bad deal, even when everyone told them it was impossible.